Now, today is the start of the first week without Twitter for Nigerians. This after the government suspended the social media platform on Friday, saying it helps to spread misinformation and fake news. Well, now the Buhari administration has upped the ante, ordering all broadcasting stations in Nigeria to suspend patronage of Twitter, deinstall their Twitter handles, and discontinue using the platform as a source of information. It follows a decision by Twitter to remove a tweet by President Buhari last week. The tweet referred to separatist groups and a promise by Mr. Buhari to punish those who had attacked the security forces. There are an estimated 40 million Twitter users in Nigeria, according to the Associated Press. Numerous countries, including the US, Britain, and the European Union, have condemned the suspension of Twitter in Nigeria.
We had, very useful discussions. These are countries that we consider to be close friends and partners of Nigeria. So we sat down and reviewed the whole situation and just restated the security concerns of Mr. President. Of course, also we also discussed the role of social media as a platform. Social media good for communication, dissemination of information, but like everything else, it can be used to do good and it can be used to do bad. And unfortunately, the bad, but social media is often used to commit, has very dire consequences on human lives and property, and in our case also threatened the unity of the country. And so as the responsibility of the government to maintain law and order, to maintain security, and to preserve a human life, we have to take every measure to ensure that all those are preserved.
We did speak about the issues of social media, and I think that our concern is to convey that, as President Biden said in his inauguration in January, it is actually when you're in your most troubled times often that our need for individual expression, open public conversations, and accountability is perhaps even greater. But we are here as partners who want to see Nigeria succeed. We want to see this place in a unified, peaceful, and prosperous, and that's how all of our activities are arranged.
The US ambassador to Nigeria there, and before her, the Nigerian Minister of Foreign Affairs. Well, for more on this and his assessment of other major issues currently making headlines in Nigeria, I'm joined now in the studio by the politician and former Minister of Information and Communications, Frank Nweke Jr. Thank you very much indeed, Minister, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Charles. It's good to be here.
What's your reaction to the government's decision to suspend Twitter in Nigeria?
Well, like a lot of people, like a lot of Nigerian citizens and friends of Nigeria, I was very shocked that government will take such a drastic decision. Because I believe that there are consequences for such action. If Nigeria wants to be respected in the Committee of Nations, if Nigeria seeks to be seen as a respected member of the global community, I think that Nigeria would also have to play by the rules, for lack of a better way to put it. And I know that one thing that is extremely important, globally speaking, within the international community, is the issue of free speech. The freedom for expression. In any case, our constitution, I think section 39 or so, sub 1, guarantees freedom of speech. And this is a democracy. And I'm not so sure that it's even I don't know how pragmatic such a decision could be under the circumstance in which we find ourselves. Because I think that there are advantages to having people even say what they think, what they feel. You know the people saying it, you know what they're saying, and you know how to engage them. Therefore, to undertake the kind of action that we now see, you're driving people on the ground. People have to seek other means. And the other way to look at it is, do we really have the infrastructure to be able to implement this? I doubt very much. And in the 21st century, with advancements in technology, there'll be ways to circumvent this. And the recent, I remember in the intro where you were talking about even the directives to media houses and people to remove their media handles. Man, it's very disappointing.
So presumably, you wouldn't have taken this sort of action when you were Minister of Information.
I'm not so sure that. Well, you know, having been in government myself, I'll be restrained in maybe responding to that question by saying no, I wouldn't have taken that decision. And I say this because, not being in government, you may not be fully apprised of the entire context that, you know, enabled government or that drove government to this decision. But I think that as a government way back, there was a deliberate and conscious effort to respect human rights, to respect the Constitution, and to encourage people to really to engage, you know, of course, within the remit of the law.
Nevertheless, let's not forget that during your time as minister, you had quite a few run-ins with CNN. When you were minister, you were very critical of their coverage of Nigeria, and you made strenuous effort to get rid of their correspondent in Nigeria, and you finally succeeded in that quest.
Well, I don't know what you mean run-ins, but a particular incident that I recall was the activity of an individual that we considered very unethical in his practices, in his engagement with Nigeria, and we had proof of this, right? He was paid on that occasion to do a story on Nigeria, and all efforts to really get CNN to allow us opportunity to really state our own side of the case failed. And so once we presented proof, CNN did not hesitate at the time eventually to really let the gentleman go. So he was a mercenary of sorts, and we had ample proof.
So these are two different circumstances.
Yeah, these are two different circumstances, right? Right. But to ask a global corporation like Twitter just to shut down in Nigeria because the tweet of the president was taken down. You know, first of all, this is a private company. That's number one. Secondly, they are guided by a set of rules. Users are guided by a set of rules. If you choose to subscribe to Twitter, the logical thing to do is to comply with a set of rules provided by Twitter. If you feel that you cannot comply with those rules, then maybe you should, deregister yourself, right? So it's there. In any case, it's a global platform. And the kinds of rules that they have put in place, these rules are meant to, you know, protect people, protect communities, protect countries, protect constituencies, protect individuals. These rules are there. So I'm not so sure, honestly speaking, that this was the best thing to do under this circumstance.
Now, some people have suggested that Nigerians should ignore this ban. What's your take on that?
Nigeria should ignore it.
Well, given the government's directive not to use Twitter, given that there are digital, because obviously there are ways they can get around it.
Absolutely.
I mean, given the digital opportunities that Twitter has helped so many to connect to in Nigeria and across Africa, I mean, are they being irresponsible by asking people to ignore this ban, bearing in mind that the government says that it will prosecute people if they continue to use Twitter?
Well, I think that the reaction of the people speaks to the legitimacy of the government of the day, the perception, how people feel. That's really the way I see it. And so if you take the kind of decision that you've taken and your citizens are saying, oh, please, you're on your own, literally speaking, I would be worried if I was in government at this time. It means that there's very significant trust deficit between the citizens and the government. And that's not very good, either for the image of government or for the image of Nigeria, generally speaking. And like I said at the beginning, this is the 21st century. Significant advancements in technology. There will be ways to circumvent this. there'll be ways to circumvent it. So and again, when you give orders or issue directives or make laws, you must be mindful as well before you make these laws in how you want to ensure compliance with the law. So why do you make laws that you do not have the entire
or make
pronouncements?
Because there's an argument that is being made that this is not actually constitutional, and you made that point.
I made that point. So you don't have the entire wherewithal to actually enforce it,
right.
Compliance. So why bother?
Well, the government says that these tweets are spreading misinformation, which is leading to protests, violence, hate speech, etc. And they argue that they have a duty to protect the country. You don't think that's a good enough reason based on national security?
It is a very important reason, but it is not sufficient. Because we know that the frustrations that are being expressed by citizens, whether it's on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or even on local media and the newspapers, we know that these frustrations are symptomatic of deeper problems within our country.
Let me ask you to please hold that thought. We'll come straight back to you and
Absolutely.
You'll finish it. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat with the Nigerian politician and former Minister of Information and Communications, Frank Nweke Jr. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Enyegolu. Now, virtually every top Nigerian newspaper today is leading with the issue of the government's ban on the use of Twitter in the country. Top of the lot, This Day newspaper leading with what it says is the searing criticism the Buhari administration is continuing to face over the decision, with several senior advocates of Nigeria and constitutional experts pointedly insisting that the action contravenes Section 39, subsection 1 of the country's constitution. They also dismissed the directive of Nigeria's Attorney General and Minister of Justice, Abubakar Malami, who has ordered the prosecution of any Twitter user who defies the ban. The senior lawyers are arguing that the suspension of Twitter and the threat of prosecution amounts to a hindrance of the right of Nigerian citizens to freedom of expression and the receipt of information without interference. And the Nigerian politician and former Minister of Information and Communications, Frank Nweke Jr., is still with me in the studio. Thank you for staying with us.
Thank you, Charles.
And before we went on break, you were responding to a question that I asked you, with the government saying that these tweets are spreading misinformation, which is leading to violence, protests, hate speech, that sort of thing. Please continue.
Very well. So I was saying that, as far as I'm concerned, the expressions of, whatever communication you find by Nigerian citizens on Twitter are just symptoms of much deeper problems within our polity, economic, social, political. So if you ask me, the enemy is not Twitter. The enemy is not the Nigerian citizens. The enemy, if you ask me, is the high unemployment, unbearably high unemployment at 33%. And these are official figures. We know that, the figures are much worse than this. The problem is endemic poverty. That is the enemy. Twitter is not the enemy. The problem is the poor infrastructure situation we have in the country, the poor electricity situation, the poor road infrastructure. That is the problem, right? The frustrations that these young people cannot get work, they cannot get jobs. It is the insecurity, that's the problem. Twitter is not the problem. And so why do we not focus on these key issues rather than grabbing at what I would like to call straws? No, this is not the problem. Because if people are frustrated because they don't have jobs, are you saying that it's okay to be unemployed? Are you saying that if I'm unemployed that I don't have a right to say I'm unemployed? Is that what you're saying? Okay? And then, of course, the famous thing that the devil is an idle mind is the devil's workshop. So let's address the key issues. The enemy is the discriminatory practices of government.
And of course, one of the
exclusionary practices of government. That's the enemy. That is what is promoting hate. That is what is promoting this frustration. That is really what it is. And we must tell ourselves the truth.
And one of the reasons, one of the things that people have raised, why there's lots of objections with this Twitter suspension, is the fact that a lot of people are actually making their living through modern tech methods. How do you think Mr. Nweke, this Twitter debacle will affect businesses in Nigeria. I mean, you were a former Director General of the respected economic think tank, the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. There's an estimate that as a result of this ban, $6 million around that are being lost every day by the Nigerian economy. The NESG has actually come out and warned about the problems that this might, the effect it might have on investor confidence. So looking at the contribution of the tech sector to Nigeria's GDP, it was that sector, from what I understand, that helped to rescue Nigeria from recession. But that sector clearly now under attack, according to some.
You see, and I mean, thank you very much, Charles. Of course, technology, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, right, and so many other, TikTok, and many others that we are not even aware of, have evolved over the years and have become very important tools for commerce, very important tools for interaction, very important tools for advertisers, very important tools for communication. These things are there. And if Nigeria seeks to play in the global economy, we cannot afford to undermine the use of these tools. To do so would be for us to shoot ourselves in the foot. And of all times, at the point that your economy is prostrate, at the time that your economy is just inching out of recession, of all times, when you have such high unemployment, and there are young people who, because of their inability to find jobs in the formal sector, have taken recourse to Twitter, to these technology platforms, and have created, enterprises for themselves. And now, because the president's speech was taken down, these enterprises should be shut down. They cannot reach their customers. Excuse me? What is government about without the people? What is a government without the people? This doesn't make sense to me personally. And I can see why the NESG will say what it said. We're a think tank. It's an economic group. And we understand that these things have implications that extend beyond our shores. There are investors that seek to come here. There are investors that seek to take the Twitter is like a barometer of the state of our economy.
And that's what I was going to bring up, because in terms of investor confidence,
yes,
which was already at an all-time low,
yes,
critics are now saying that it's been crushed by this move. So businesses are losing money. The government itself is losing money as a result of this, and it's the use of the Buhari it's a case of the Buhari administration shooting itself in the foot, because the ultimate loser is not Twitter but Nigeria. Do you agree with that assessment?
Absolutely, I do, and I thought I made the point earlier. So I believe very strongly that I said to you, listen, that at a time when Nigeria's economy is just inching out of recession, right? At a time when unemployment is so high, at a time of such grave insecurity in our country, our existence as a nation is threatened. I'm saying that people are trying to make ends meet. People are struggling to eke out a living. And in spite of their inability to find opportunities in the formal sector, some of these people have gone ahead to actually create enterprises online, using Twitter, using Facebook, using Instagram. So much commercial activity goes on there. And now, of all times, you choose to make this kind of move at this point. I think it's not a very pragmatic move to my mind.
We've got about a couple of minutes before we have to take a break,
yes,
but obviously we will come back and continue talking. Is it also a bit perverse that Nigeria's legal system, I was reading somewhere, someone was making this point quite robustly, yes, Nigeria's legal system, which has not convicted a single suspect for kidnapping almost 1,000 school children since December, now has a new priority, which is to prosecute Nigerians who use Twitter. I mean, that sounds, according to this person, like a mixture of priorities.
Preposterous, if you ask me. And I think I made the allusion to insecurity being the enemy, poverty being the enemy, hunger being the enemy. It's not Twitter. It's not Twitter, right? And Nigeria has been ravaged by insurgencies, terrorism, banditry. And as you rightly observed, in almost a decade now, we've not had one successful prosecution, to the best of my knowledge. I could be mistaken, but at least I'm not aware of one individual. Even people who have taken up arms against the state, who were captured, who were arrested, were eventually released. And then now, you then suggest that Twitter is the enemy. Even when you have arrested the enemy of the state, you have let them go. Now, let me say this. I am not in any way offering any kind of support for citizens who choose to take up arms against Nigeria. Government has a responsibility to ensure law and order. My point is that government would have to really take the benefit of existing laws. I mean, we have laws on sedition. If there are people who say things that undermine the security and sovereignty of our country, of course, by all means, they should be held accountable. But to completely throw a blanket over the entire citizenry because of a tweet, I think that it calls the judgment of government to question in very significant ways.
Okay, please stay with us. We want to talk with you some more. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat with a politician and former Nigerian Minister of Information and Communications, Frank Nweke Jr. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Anyegolu. Now, without a doubt, Nigeria, like many other countries, is dependent on stability for the international investment doors to open and for its economy to grow. Insecurity is arguably its biggest crisis since it returned to civilian rule in 1999. At one point, as globalization took hold, along with a measure of good governance, Nigeria's economy was growing at nearly 7%. And there was serious talk of including N for Nigeria in the BRICS group of emerging economies. But insecurity has put all that on hold and at risk, if not completely killed it off. And the world is looking more and more like a smaller, much more distant place. The respected think tank, the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, has warned that insecurity is the biggest threat to investment in Nigeria, and it's urged the government to provide security agencies with the necessary supports to deal with the problem. Many others have also warned that how Nigeria tackles insecurity and increasing inter-ethnic violence and discord will be key to its growth and development. Well, in addition to being a politician and Nigeria's former Minister of Information and Communications, my guest today, Frank Nweke Jr., was also the former Director General of the economic think tank, the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. And Mr. Nweke is still with me in the studio. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us.
Thank you, Charles.
And I was going to bring up, we're talking about insecurity. It's pretty obvious that Nigeria is going through a very difficult patch at the moment. But you raised an interesting point about constitutional amendments, constitutional reforms, and so on. And I'm wondering if you can make a link between solving the problems of insecurity in Nigeria and that constitutional amendment that's ongoing at the moment.
Yeah, well, thank you, Charles. So when you look at the totality of what is going on today, the expressions of frustration, right? And at the heart of this frustration is people have made allusion to the structure of Nigeria. People feel that they're excluded. People feel that the government is not inclusive. They've been, discriminatory in appointments. People believe that the various ethnic groups, that the basis of coexistence ought to be better defined. There's a sense that some ethnic groups have one up against the other ethnic groups, and therefore they feel that we need to come to the table to have this conversation. And of course, there are a few other things to do with the electoral laws, the issues around fiscal federalism. People have also made the point that, let's go back to the 1963 Republican Constitution, because that was the basis of the regional governments way back. And the truth of the matter is that depending on who you're talking to, right, there's no part of this country today that has been spared violence, insecurity. There's no part of this country today that has been spared underdevelopment, really, realistically speaking. You couldn't say, for instance, that the hospitals in, say, North Central Nigeria are significantly better than the hospitals in Northeast Nigeria, for instance, right? And so there's that malaise, generally speaking. So part of what even a group and part of Fixed Politics is talking about is, look, it's important for us to come to the table. Let the various groups in this country come to the table to really discuss the basis of our coexistence, right? Of course, we understand that the Constitution has been amended, many times in the past. But if you keep, I don't know, Charles, I don't know how old you are, but you remember before, say like 20, 30 years ago when you had vehicles like...
I'm certainly older than 30 years.
Well, okay, Peugeots and the rest of them. When you had, if you had an engine knock, for instance, what do? You said, you're going to say that you need to have the engine fixed. And so the engine block has to be, the crankshaft has to be, reset to either 010 or 020 and 030, right? By the time it gets to 030, that's the last time you will have to get a new crankshaft. That's the way that I like to see the Nigerian Constitution, the current one now. So many amendments that actually have not addressed the fundamental issues of the structure of this nation, right? So people are canvassing for equality of states. People are canvassing for equality of local governments. People are canvassing for for fiscal federalism. People are canvassing for state police. This is the groundswell of demands that you find today. And the best way to do this, to really, really, really address these issues, is to bring the federating units to the table to discuss whether or not, or how best to go about.
But is
really
it an
changing
issue of getting people together? Because there have been several instances in the past when Nigerians sat down together to discuss the problems of the country. There have been constitutional conferences, there have been national conferences and all that sort of thing. Isn't the issue Charles, implementation?
No, Charles, it's not. Okay, fine. That's one way to look at it. And that's a very important point that you make, right? But because of the very structure, right, under a democracy, what body really has the constitutional authority to do this? It is the National Assembly. The structure of that National Assembly as currently constituted goes to the heart of the Nigerian problem. That you have a situation where through military fiat, constituencies were delineated to the advantage of certain groups of the country, to the advantage of certain parts of the country. And so what it means is that whatever these groups of people do not want will never pass the Senate, will never pass in the National Assembly. That is what is at the heart of the situation. And that is why I was making the point that it's important for the constituent parts of this country to come to the table, to have a conversation, right, and on how we want to coexist.
Basically, it's not enough to go through the National Assembly. It wouldn't satisfy the different parts.
Yes, the reason why it is important for you to have a conversation, first of all, is to agree the heads of the main issues that that are going to be discussed at such a conference. Okay, and let's also not forget the point that the very origins of this constitution, it was from military governments in the past. At least the 1999 constitution was handed down to us by the military government of General Abdulsalam Abubakar. Right. So in a democracy, I believe that it is time for people to actually decide to say, okay, let's have a very in-depth look at this constitution and see how we really, really want to coexist, really see how we want to structure our coexistence for the benefit of our country, for the benefit and advancement of our country. That's
and
what I think.
These increasingly loud calls for more equity that you're talking about, this greater fairness and more recognition from various regions in Nigeria, various ethnic groups and so on. What do you think will be the impact of all this on the 2023 presidential election? Do you think it'll be significant as we go forward?
It is going to be very significant, Charles. And honestly, I wish my name was Nostradamus. I would have been better placed to answer that question, the man who saw tomorrow. But from just a human angle, just from normal human angle, I worry greatly. Because what you hear people saying is that, listen, that the very structure of the federation already disadvantages their region and their people, and therefore that any electoral outcomes will be skewed in favor of some groups of people. That's the narrative that is out there. That's the narrative that
But that
is out
hasn't
there.
always been proven to be true, though. I mean, that there have been people from other parts of Nigeria who have become, a minority president, not from one of the major ethnic groups. I mean, a minority person became president of Nigeria, not just by default because a president, died and he was vice president, but he subsequently won elections.
So the context is very, very important, right? The kinds of things that transpired behind are very, very important. And then subsequently what happened? So
Well, he lost the election later on.
Okay, well, he lost the election, but the point that is being made today is that, and you've heard a lot of people who suggest that this was like some kind of favor that was done. And that's also part of the narrative that you have out there, right? Yes, he was elected, okay? But then what happened? Again, he was literally railroaded out of office.
Yeah, but it was a very,
people.
it was a very sort of disputatious. So there are a lot of issues around that, about whether or not this particular section of the country should have had more time, whether the other one was trying to usurp that time and all that sort of thing. And it went to the polls. That did not stop him from running again. I mean, in spite of those issues, he went to the polls and he lost, and then he conceded that he had lost.
He conceded, and I want to say that, that's a very important point that you make, right? But since then, I think that the nature of the conversation in our country has transformed, has changed completely in a way that is very disturbing, in a way that jeopardizes the existence of Nigeria in very fundamental ways. So I believe that 7-year opportunity or 6-year opportunity was clearly insufficient to really cement the kind of cohesion that one would have seen by the presidency of that individual.
And given all that you've just said, sum up for us how you think people are likely to vote into. I'm not asking you to be Nostradamus, and I'm not talking about individuals or parties they're going to vote for, no. I'm asking you more the issues that you think that will most likely affect the way people vote, given all the things that are happening in Nigeria at the moment.
So I believe that the issue of security is in fact, is probably the most important issue on the table today. I believe that the issue of equity is also a very, very important issue on the table. The issue of inclusion, right? Inclusion in the sense of some parts of the country that believe that they ought to get a chance, for instance, right? So you look at the Southeast, for instance, there's a very, very strong demand from that part of the country that, the country should, that the region should be given a chance to produce the presidency. So I also believe that issues around fiscal federalism is going to play a very, very important role. So these are some of the issues that we should look out for, okay?
Right.
And I also hope very, very strongly that issues around competence, competent leadership would also be brought to the table.
That's a very important point.
It's so critical, because I also believe
in fact,
that
everything else could be subsumed into that one thing.
Indeed. Indeed. So I also hope that it plays a very, very important role in 2023.
And for the voters and the people of Nigeria, do you think they have a lot of anxieties today and are questioning more whether the political system can address these issues?
Absolutely. Naturally, and I believe that the fact that the security situation is deteriorating, right? The fact that this economy has gone into recession twice in about 3 years or 4 years, the fact that poverty has become endemic, the fact that inflation is as high as it is, the fiscal monetary authorities, the fact that unemployment is so high, of course, these are sources of worry for the citizens, and of course, clearly provides a basis for citizens to question the capacity of government to address them, especially because they've been persistent. They've been persistent, really.
So if you were a member of the APC at the moment, which you clearly are not, but if you were, given the perception in Nigeria that you were just describing of the way they've governed the country over 2 terms, would you be worried?
I'll be worried, especially if I expect that there will be free and fair elections.
Right, but you're saying if you expect, so you
Yes.
don't expect that there will be free and fair
There are
elections.
issues around the integrity of our elections. There are very, very important issues around the integrity of our elections. They have important issues, Charles, and I'm sure you know this.
But then, I mean, you were a member of the PDP, and those same issues were raised when the PDP was in office.
Well, those same issues were raised.
And they trailed the PDP throughout its 16 years in office.
So what that then says is that as a country and as a people, we must work hard to address issues of electoral integrity,
Right.
and to make sure that we come to a point where citizens are more comfortable with the outcome of our elections.
Okay, we'll come back in a minute and talk a little bit about you yourself. You're watching the Arise interview, plenty more still ahead, as we continue our chat with the politician and former Nigerian Minister of Information and Communications, Frank Nweke Jr. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Enyegolu. Now, my guest today is the Nigerian politician and former Minister of Information and Communications, Frank Nweke Jr. Mr. Nweke was, of course, also at some point Nigeria's Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs and Special Duties, as well as Minister of Youth Development and also Minister of National Orientation. So he's been around the federal ministerial block a few times, so to speak. In addition to all that, Mr. Nweke was also at the state level the Chief of Staff to the Governor of Enugu State. And much later, after he left government, he became the Director General of the respected Nigerian Economic Summit Group, the economic think tank that brings the public and the private sectors together. And Frank Nweke Jr. is still with me in the studio. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us.
Thank you, Charles.
Can we talk a little bit about your background as a former Minister of Youth Development, Special Duties, Intergovernmental Affairs, and then you became Minister of Information and Communications under President Obasanjo. And before that, as I mentioned, you were the Chief of Staff to the Governor of Enugu State. How have you evolved politically as a result of these positions that you've had in government?
Well, Charles, I have a keen interest in public policy and, of course, public service, development planning. These are my three passions, if I may say so. And so I've taken every opportunity to serve at any level very, very seriously, very, very seriously. And I believe that there's no form of service that is greater than public service. The reason being that those opportunities impose such huge responsibility on you, and you are awake, you are daily working, you're daily thinking about people that you will never ever meet, or you may never ever meet. And so I've taken those opportunities very, very seriously. Well, I don't know how you want me to recount how I have evolved. You've already recounted how I have evolved over the years. And,
yeah, but obviously, what impact has that had on you as a person evolving through those
absolutely.
different jobs?
I mean, for me, as I've gone from one position to the other, what it has done to me is just to reinforce my commitment to service and the importance of public leadership. Importance of public leadership. I believe very, very strongly that at the heart of Nigeria's problem is the quality of our politics. All right? Quality of our politics in the context of the fact that it is through politics that public leadership emerges, right? And so the quality of your education sector, the quality of your health sector, the quality of your infrastructure, the quality of your ability otherwise to maintain national cohesion and national unity has to do with the quality of your leadership. So public leadership is extremely important. And these things have become clear to me by the day in the opportunities that I had, but even as I have observed other people as they have discharged their mandate in office. And the state of affairs in our country today also bears testimony to what I've just said.
Well, I'm going to come back to that issue of leadership in a moment. But of course, after you left the government, you became the Director General of the respected think tank, the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. We mentioned that previously. How much did you learn about Nigeria's economy from being the administrator of a group that had the biggest captains of industry amongst its ranks?
I mean, look, okay, so Charles, so, thank you for that question. And then, so one thing that I like to put on the table is this, right? Being appointed minister was great. I mean, I couldn't, it's one of the high points of my political career so far. But you know that in that position, you have massive support from a massive bureaucracy. They're there, high levels, whether it's the permanent secretary, you have directors, the assistant directors, deputy directors, all the way down. You have all these people that are there. And things are set in particular ways that you must comply with, right? So one thing that going to the Nigerian Economic Summit Group did to me was that it challenged my intellect, okay? And it also gave me opportunity to really gain better understanding of Nigeria's private sector, interact with private sector operators, and gain even better understanding of the mix of policies and that is required to really build a resilient economy. It also enabled me to really understand that there is that synergy between the public and private sector is so critical for national development, right? So the public sector are makers of policy. Private sector are beneficiaries of policy. Public sector may play regulatory roles mostly, and private sectors benefit from regulatory discharge of regulatory responsibilities mostly. And so that synergy between these two sectors is really, really critical. And so if you begin to make policies without sufficient and significant consultations with the private sector, then you had better, it just means that you've made that policy for yourself, because the purpose for which you may have designed the policy is not going to be achieved. So it's such an important relationship that I really think that any government that wants to succeed must take its private sector very seriously, must take its citizens very, very seriously, and really take the policy making process very, very seriously.
So
right?
So here you are.
Yes.
I mean, you've been part of the public sector in a very high, very prominent position, minister, several ministries and so on. Now you've come to the private sector. You were there as Director General of the preeminent think tank, economic think tank, the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. You've seen the two sides. You've in fact worked to bring the two sides closer together. So in a sense, one could make the argument that you have helped to reimagine the possibilities in Nigeria. What does that say about your own personal political ambitions? You've talked about leadership, you've talked about the economy, you've been in the public sector. Where does it go from here?
Well, Charles, at the risk of repeating what I said earlier, I have a very keen interest in public policy. I have a very keen interest in public service and development planning. And yes, I've been out of government for some time. But one thing that one thing I can say for myself is that the multitude of and the significant experience I've garnered over the years have only helped me to mature and have only helped me to gain better understanding of how I might approach future roles. And so if you look at the spate of challenges that we are currently confronted with in the country, you might want to ask me, say, with the benefit of executive powers, what will be my priorities? And I'm going to say to you that one is that I take the matter of leadership very seriously. Accountable leadership, integrity, transparency, and honesty is extremely important. Openness to the citizens is extremely important. I'm going to take the matter of public communication very, very seriously. The people have a right to know. If you've been availed the mandate,
So basically, you won't cancel Twitter if you were in that executive position.
So, public communication is extremely important. The people have a right to know. You merely hold the mandate on behalf of the people, right? You're first amongst equals. You're a citizen, and the citizens have merely said, okay, you go ahead of us. We're going to back you. We're going to support you, right? and we're going to, the so-called social contract. That's really what it is. I'm going to pay attention to issues of gender equality, for instance, issues of equity. Okay, equity, because again, at the heart of our problem today in the country is the issue of equity. People who feel that government is not equitable in the distribution of amenities, in the distribution of infrastructure, the distribution of key leadership positions. That's really what it is. So that tells you that there's only so much that people can take, and that there are certain expectations from citizens when they have given you their mandate. I'm going to pay attention to issues of innovation, for instance, right? There's so much that is going on. Okay, so you look at this Twitter. It's Twitter, for instance, one company, right? Its value is estimated about $3.9 billion thereabout, if I'm correct.
Right.
You look at a company like Facebook. Facebook is
right. So you're going to focus on innovation.
Yes,
we're almost
innovation
out
things,
of
right?
time. We've got about 10 seconds or so. Does this suggest that you're going to throw your hat into the ring? It sounds like it. The question is it at a state level or at a national level?
So what I'd like to say to you,
very
first
briefly,
of all, for me, Charles, very honestly, I'm as anxious as a lot of citizens, but first there must be a country. So let me say that given the right set of circumstances, I mean, if public order is improved,
right?
I mean, if there's some things like that, of course, it's something that I'm very happy to consider very seriously.
The Nigerian politician and former Minister of Information and Communications, Frank Nweke Jr., thank you very much indeed. Very interesting chat. That's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again tomorrow.